Greetings, welcome everyone. This is Junaid again from Georgia State University Cyber, and welcome to the webinar series we've been offering through GSU-CIBER over the last 2 years or so on behalf of the MSI Cyber Consortium that represents an additional 10 schools as well. Well, this webinar series had started in April 2020. And since then, we've offered more than 80 webinars, and we're just adding one more today with our distinguished guests. And we've been covering topics in the areas of research or teaching and or conversations with business executives. And the latter will be an example, will be illustrated in the webinar that you all joined. This is just a reminder that all our webinars are recorded and they would be available after a short edit within a few days in our YouTube channel. And a kind request from all of you joining in is there will be an exit survey when you get out, when the webinar is finished, and would really appreciate if you would fill it up and return it to us, because it helps us a lot to get new ideas, new insights, and new guidance moving forward. And just for the fact that everyone except the panelists will be muted, but you are highly encouraged to ask any questions or share any reflections you may have in due course of the webinar by just putting it down as a question in the Q&A or putting it down in the chat box, and your questions will be delivered to the speakers. If there are any handouts, they'll be mailed out to you later on. Well, coming to today's topic and our guests, well, the topic reads Seeds of Growth, how AGCO built a global tractor powerhouse from Atlanta. And we're very privileged to have Mr. Martin Richenhagen, who is the ex-CEO of the company, Fortune 500 when he retired, global powerhouse, joined with Mr. Trevor Williams, who is our great partner at MSU-CIBER, the founder and executive of Global Atlanta. So without really further ado, I just want to hand it over to Trevor to get us into this insightful conversation that I'm also looking forward to listen to. So Trevor, floor is yours. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Junaid. I hope everybody can hear me okay.
Yeah.
I got a promotion there to founder of Global Atlanta. I have to say I didn't actually found the company, but I have found it to be a great place. So I've been here 15 years, and throughout that entire time, we've had a great partnership with Cyber, GSU-CIBER, and really enjoyed learning a lot about the cyber network and you know, the embarrassment of riches that Atlanta has with 2 cybers located in our city. So. We're very excited today to, I really see it as continuing a discussion with Martin Richenhagen, who was the first and for many years the only German CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and of an American Fortune 500 company, I should say. And Martin reminded me during our last conversation that it was a Fortune 300 company by the time he left. He made sure to point that out. But the idea for this conversation really came from another one that we held recently at the Goethe-Zentrum in Atlanta, in downtown Atlanta, Peachtree Center. And we had a book talk with Martin about his memoir, we should say, called Der Amerika-Flüsterer, which, sorry for my bad German, but in English means the America Whisperer. And we talked a lot about his experience being a German executive in an American company and how cultural differences played into that. So we'll talk a little bit about that during this discussion, but also, you know, being a continuation, I really want to dig deeper into his time at AGCO instead of focusing so much on his personal life, which we did in the other event. And I will ask Cyber if they wouldn't mind posting that a link to that discussion as well, which was quite insightful and interesting to learn how Martin went from a religion scholar and teacher to the CEO of Fortune 500 company in his life, and there's a lot of gaps to fill there. I'll just tell you a little bit more about his background. He led AGCO for 16 years from 2004 to 2020, and AGCO, if you don't know, is agricultural equipment manufacturer with multiple well-known brands, including Challenger, Fendt, Massey Ferguson, Valtra. GSI, I think, is the grain storage brand. But he still serves on the boards of directors for PPG Industries, Linde, Daimler Truck Holding, and Steel AG. I think this point gets glossed over a lot, and I really wanted to point out that he's still very active in the international business scene, despite his retirement from AGCO, and even has some other stuff in the works that we may talk about. And I'm not going to read his full bio, but he was born in Cologne, Germany, in 1952. Holds a degree in philology from the University of Bonn, Germany. Started at Hill and Müller GmbH, worked for Schindler, the elevator company, as senior executive vice president. And before joining AGCO was the group president for, I guess it's Klaas, another agricultural equipment manufacturer. So we're kind of caught up on Martin, but I just wanted to start by welcoming you, Martin, and thanking you again for making the time for Global Atlanta and also for Georgia State CIBER today.
Yes, thank you very much. At the beginning, let me say just a few words. We talk pretty much about the past and the history of AGCO, but today's performance and the outstanding stock price they enjoy is only possible with the very strong leadership of my successor, Eric Hansodia. And I'm very proud about his consistent but also creative and innovative strategy. Wall Street doesn't look so much into the past, they're only looking into the future. And I think with Eric and his team, AGCO has a very bright future in front of them. They are growing, they are outperforming their peers, and the margin improvements are really impressive.
Well, that's great to hear. And yes, I definitely don't want to position you as speaking for AGCO at this moment right now. But your reflections, I think, will be fascinating, particularly for this audience, because what I love about the CIBER audience is it's always a nice blend of business practitioners, those who are still engaged in doing business, but also educators who are teaching international business. And that's the area that we've enjoyed getting better acquainted with, is those who actually prepare our future workforce for going out into companies like AGCO. And in that vein, I think we'll talk a lot about leadership and some of the decision making that you've had to do and how you thought through those things, because I think those are the kinds of things that these educators are going to have to instill into our students going forward. So why don't you tell us, Martin, start a little bit about your history. We added the from, I guess we couldn't avoid it as Global Atlanta, but we added the from Atlanta to the end of the title, how AGCO built a global tractor powerhouse from Atlanta. Tell us a bit about how you came to Atlanta and how AGCO itself came here. I think it's a lesson in, as much as we want to drive economic development and really attract companies, sometimes things just happen and we have to grow from where we're planted, so to speak. So tell us a bit about AGCO's journey to Atlanta and your personal journey here.
Yeah, I can basically make it, I will talk a little bit about the history. So a very German conglomerate decided to go to America through an acquisition, and they bought a very well-established brand in the area of farm equipment and construction equipment, but because of poor management and not understanding the market well enough, they basically completely failed. They made mistakes like changing the paint color, which is important in our industry, from orange to green, so another green. And they basically also decided to use European technologies, an air-cooled diesel engine, which didn't work well in the more hot climates of certain parts of America. And after a few years, they decided to sell AGCO. They didn't find a buyer. And so the management team decided to do a management buyout in, I think it was in around 89, 90 around. And that's exactly the time of the German reunification. And so because they're the only functionable business which generated profits was the parts business, and because the parts warehouse, the biggest parts warehouse in the US, was located here in Atlanta. And because they didn't like the very cold climate up north, they decided to come to Atlanta. Also, the airport at that time was important. So from Atlanta, you can basically reach every destination in the world easily. And that was the beginning of AGCO. I happen to know the founder, a guy called Robert Ratliff, and I found him very open, very straightforward. We developed a good relationship. I work for a German competitor, and my idea was always to compete hard in business, but to still entertain a good, friendly relationship with your competitors, and that is what we did. Then a few years later, the AGCO aircraft basically crashed in Birmingham, England, and the COO, the CEO, and some successors all died in that crash. And so Bob Ratliff had
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was quite dramatic. And Bob Ratliff then had to come up with a succession plan. He called me and he said whether I would be interested to be on the shortlist. I learned that the shortlist was 16 people, 15 Americans, and just one German at that time. And I thought, well, that's more like a learning experience. So I came to at that time, the Ritz-Carlton in Bucket, which unfortunately has been renamed, and the beautiful restaurant has been closed as well. So basically I went there, and already at the first meeting with the board of directors, my impression was that this could work. And I hadn't told my family, my wife and my kids, so because I was on my way to move to Switzerland. And so when I came home and said, what if we would go to Atlanta instead of Zurich? And everybody was excited about it because my kids always were very, very Americanized in a way. So when 9/11, we had American flags out of our windows in Germany. My youngest son, Martin Jr., who has a son now also called Martin, born in Atlanta. So number 3 is a true American. Martin 2 and Martin 1 became American only a few years ago. And so he always had a sticker on his suitcase, proud to be an American. And I said, well, what do you think? What do Americans think about this? You are not an American. And he said, oh, they all love it. And in school, he always had a problem because in German schools, they teach English, but because he had been on an exchange program to the US, he was very proud to speak American English, and he accepted some lower scores because of his American accent.
Well, we've got 3 generations of American Martins now,
yes.
Origins in Germany. So that's really great.
All based in Atlanta. So my son works for Porsche in their headquarters here in Atlanta.
Amazing, amazing. Another great German brand that's set down roots here. So tell us a bit about, I mean, you mentioned German unification. I think that's an interesting thing to mention in the context of the formation of the company. Can you tell me why you mentioned that? Is it mainly because they didn't want to, with an unstable kind of situation back home, did they want to keep the global headquarters in the US at that time? Is that what you were sort of insinuating?
Well, the founders basically, the business was American at the beginning, and it was small. So it was only about 250 million in revenues. And the founders, and it was mainly American. And that is, and the founders were true Americans as well, and therefore they chose Atlanta as the headquarters. Atlanta at that time, of course, was not the Atlanta we know today. It was much smaller, and I think the Olympics and also the fact that the decision was taken to build that international airport here basically created the growth we have seen in Atlanta.
Well, so there were about 14 years between the time that it was founded through this management buyout and the time that you took it over, it seems like. So where was it when you got to the Ritz-Carlton and you were talking to the board? Like, what was the status at the time? It was already a public company. It had already grown quite a bit through acquisitions, but where did you see that it could actually work from your perspective and that you could actually grow it from where it was? It seems
Well,
like
Atlanta,
sometimes it
AGCO,
could be
when I
harder to take
joined,
something that's working well.
yeah, when I joined AGCO, the company was at about 3 billion in revenues. The stock price was below $10. I think it was at about 8. And I invested my last incentive bonus from the German competitor and bought AGCO shares and went to Wall Street and said, this is what you need to do. AGCO went through a period of growth through acquisitions. They made about 26 acquisitions of smaller and bigger companies. Some of these acquisitions were really market leaders or had important brands like Massey Ferguson, the technology leader in the world market leader in the tractor business. Fendt, a family-owned business in Germany, was also one of these acquisitions, and they grew the company only more or less through external growth. They hadn't done too much post-merger integration, and my predecessor always told me, before the street understands what you are doing, you have to basically do the next acquisition already. So he was really growth oriented and he was very fast. He had a great team. Andy Beck, his CFO, who is still at AGCO right now, was very, very important for all those deals. When I joined, margins were low. We had by far too many dealers. We had about 1,000 dealers in the United States, which diluted the brand value, and we had too many brands. So we had 26 different brands, and that actually we needed to do something.
Well, that actually gets into one of my questions as well. Like, can you outline some of the challenges of growing through an acquisition or through an acquisition strategy? It seems that at the beginning, you mentioned in our previous conversation that they had, instead of they kind of had this innovative strategy of selling off their receivables, and that helped them gain the cash that they needed to start growing through these acquisitions. But it seems like that could also come with risks as well. So can you kind of give us a sense for what the opportunities and the risks are when you grow that way?
It did influence their strategy initially quite a bit, because they had to be extremely cost conscious, which is good, in a way, so that it creates the right approach to managing a business. But on the other hand, it was also a disadvantage because they could not afford to invest in research and development, which was desperately needed. Massey Ferguson, who was a very successful English-Canadian conglomerate, went through a very difficult period of time during which they were owned by private equity, and they had not invested in product development at all. So they needed a complete reinvention of the brand. Today, Massey Ferguson is one of the leaders again. Massey Ferguson, including their licensees, is the most sold tractor in the world. So that means it was an important acquisition, but they didn't do that well. So we needed to invest in research and development. We needed to invest in people. We needed to invest in the factories. We needed to invest in capacity. We needed to invest in IT. So we had about 30 different, I think 60 at the beginning, different IT systems. So that means the headline was pretty much post-merger integration. So my predecessor had all the fun of doing those deals, and we had the work then to make it happen.
What are the, it seems like if you're growing through acquisitions, it seems like, there would be a temptation to potentially, put everybody under the same brand umbrella to get the efficiencies that you're supposed to get out of mergers. But at the same time, you were acquiring these brands that already had a strong following. So how did you kind of decide which brands to jettison, which brands to keep, and how to position the AGCO brand itself against these others that you were sort of holding under the umbrella?
Yeah, we discontinued the AGCO brand as a product brand just at the beginning, because AGCO has never been a brand in the industry, so it was not needed. Then we basically focused on the heritage, the brand image, the brand value which had been created, and of course a brand like Massey Ferguson, which was more than 170 years old. We knew that we wanted to keep it. A brand like Fendt was very important. So in the meantime, AGCO does focus pretty much on Fendt, Valtra, and Massey Ferguson when it comes to tractors. And in the grain and protein business, you call GSI. They also focus on just a few brands only. So the brands are clearly positioned, which is important to create brand identity, and they are differentiated. So it doesn't help you if you basically have one product and just put different logos on it. This is nothing the market really wants. So a farmer wants to know that this is his brand, he trusts, and that this brand is different from other brands.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fact that you had to invest so much in R&D and all of these new IT systems, et cetera. How did you fund that? I mean, it seems like you went to the public markets to do so, but how were you able to persuade them that, this is going to lead to efficiencies and growth, when at that point, it wasn't necessarily proven, at least among the new brands that you were buying?
Yeah, in 2004, we just went out to the market because we needed to fund the acquisition of Valtra, a leading Finnish Brazilian business. But after that, everything was funded through our earnings. So that means we invested in research and development. We invested in infrastructure, so in our factories. We invested in IT, and we invested in people. And so that was all done with improved profitability. So if you would basically add the money we invested internally to the bottom line, let's say, and that is what investors, shareholders typically do, you could see that the performance of the company did improve every year.
How do you, counsel other companies, like you're on the boards of these large multinational companies? How do you know when it's right to kind of grow through acquisitions versus kind of growing out of your own revenues?
I think it's pretty simple in a way. You need to do a kind of greenfield analysis. So one is you start a business where you don't have a product, where you don't have distribution, you don't have a brand, you don't have factories, and then you basically can come to an estimated cost easily, and then you can compare that with the acquisition of a business. The price expectations, the multiples, and you also know the cost of restructuring or the quality of the company you buy. Not every business AGCO bought was really great. So there were certainly many smaller companies which were not in good conditions. They were bought out of bankruptcy and they somewhat disappeared. So that means you need to make sure that you do a proper comparison, and then you know what to do.
When you're integrating companies, how do you get employees to buy in? Like, say if they were working for Massey Ferguson, now they're working for AGCO. I mean, you kind of empower them to say that, hey, we're still investing in the Massey Ferguson brand? And if so, how do you get them to buy into the AGCO vision? You know, it seems like that cohesion issue could be a problem.
One is you need to convince them, and you need to tell them that what your strategy is, what your vision is. Second, I think it's important to keep the brand intact, or if you don't, to explain them why another brand is better for them. It's a lot about communication, talking to people, and listening to people as well. So I give you an example. When Fendt, when AGCO bought Fendt, a kind of mid-sized family-owned pure Bavarian tractor business, everybody was scared. The Germans were scared. The Fendt employees were scared. The work council was not very positive about the deal. The government in Germany and the Bavarian state was not very positive about it. And by talking to the people, and this was my advantage, by out of a sudden having a German CEO coming from the United States, understanding their requirements, we could make them extremely successful. And the last, or one of the last family owners is always walking around the little city where Fendt is located and telling everybody that nobody in his family was capable to run the company properly, that he couldn't have done it, and that AGCO has done a wonderful job in growing Fendt. This year, Fendt will produce twice as many tractors as ever before. And they still have a wonderful product, but we also invested in the factory. So we invested about 500 million in a brand new factory, which was very, very important to the city. And we basically also, in another factory they have, we consolidated all the cabs we are using internally in one factory, which before only worked for Fendt. And my successor, basically, and that is why the strategy of AGCO is very consistent. And that is why I'm very proud of this smooth transition, because, you know, transitions not always work properly, but this one worked very, very well. Now brought Fendt to the United States, and they are doing they're very, very successful here in the United States, just because the product is so good.
You talked about listening. I mean, I really feel like you told a story in the last conversation about having to, in one of your previous roles, having to negotiate with unions in the US. You've done the same in France, for instance, in the Beauvais plant, with the Massey Ferguson plant there that y'all have lauded so much. And of course, you've got some cultural background with France as well. You've been knighted by the French government. You speak French. I just wondered, how do you feel that ability to kind of negotiate, communicate with employees and your team, is that something that you built through kind of softer skills, or is that something you learned in the business itself?
No, you need to come in already with a good set of soft skills. You need to have certain principles. One of my principles always has been, and still is today, I say what I think and I do what I say. And this also works very well with union leaders, because when you accept and know what they are required to know and you deliver, I think you are already in a good position.
How did you handle the issue of hiring, particularly at the executive level and at the expatriate level? I know that you probably would want to keep as much of the local team in these different countries as possible, but when you're strategizing around a global company, how did you decide whether to hire local management versus sending in your executives from other parts of the world?
Well, in general, one could say that I always try to run the local businesses with local people. And I do believe that is what AGCO still does today. We do have a rotation between the various countries, which is very helpful because it helps people to understand various cultures. But in general, we try to manage the companies with a local workforce. At the beginning, the problem was that the people we had here in the United States were not really excellent because most of them were not coming from inside our industry. And so we had to empower people, we had to invest a lot in education, and also we had to hire excellent people. When I talked to my head of HR at that time, true American Norman Boyd, and told them, why don't you want to hire better people? He said, well, actually, they don't want to work for us. So that needs some marketing also in human resource to convince people that AGCO is a company you want to work with. And today, this is not AGCO's problem at all anymore. My successor, for example, had a very successful career at the leading competitor in the United States. I was told not to use the name, to not make it more popular, but it was John Deere. And so we hire people today from Caterpillar, from John Deere, from the big automotive or truck companies, and they don't have a problem to attract excellent people, because when you are successful and when your performance is good, you automatically can do that. And then what matters is the culture. And AGCO in our industry was always famous for an outstanding, wonderful culture.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the investment that you made early on is probably paying dividends right now, given that we're in what many describe to be an unprecedented talent war. You know, with rising wages, people seem to be jumping jobs and moving around, especially after the pandemic, and in ways that they never have before. So, is it as simple as culture? I mean, or is there more that
culture is very important, and that is proven by how do you measure whether you are successful? That's retention. So when you have a very good retention rate, you know that you do certain things right. And the culture I liked was very simple. I tried to avoid to do everything I didn't like when I reported to somebody. So that was rather simple, but I also, let's say, it came with a kind of a policy which is based on delegation, on empowerment of people. So my job was very, very entrepreneurial. So instead of running a good, solid company where nobody wants you to change a lot and just going concern, I had the opportunity to build a business which was only fun. So during my whole 16 years, I enjoyed every day. I worked, I went to the office with a few exceptions when we had difficult board meetings, but I had also an excellent board, very, very supportive directors, and the street also liked what we were doing and still likes what AGCO is doing.
Yeah, well, you mentioned retention, and I guess you're a prime example of that because you stayed around 16 years. Did you know at the time going in, like, did you think I have a 16-year or 20-year horizon or runway, or did you just think, hey, we'll kind of take this day to day? Because I would imagine that affects how you want to lead the company.
Well, first, I didn't believe that I would get the job. Second, I didn't believe that I would survive for a long period of time. This is why the first year my family stayed in Germany and I was here on my own, living in a small flat on Old Alabama Road. And then only after a year, I said to my family that they could or should come over. And then I was looking into the statistics, and the average survival time of a Fortune 500 CEO still is something like 2.5 years only. So when I said, well, if you do it and if you survive for 5 years, that will be okay. And that's pretty much what people normally do. I didn't expect it to be 16.5 years, but I liked it.
Sorry, I was muted. We've got some questions coming into the Q&A, and I would encourage people to go ahead and throw your questions in there, particularly since we can have this interactive discussion with Martin. Junaid, did you want to say something?
Yes, actually, yeah, Trevor, some questions are piling up as you're speaking with this intriguing conversation. One question came from Ani in regards to your views about competition to AGCO from other domestic, that's the US, or international competitors. An example like Mahindra tractors from India is given. So Ani wants to know your view about this competition locally and internationally.
Yeah, so the market is very consolidated, and there are only 3 true global players. And then there are some players, local players, or players which we also know here in the United States. You talked about Mahindra. Mahindra, it's a small Indian tractor. It's a reliable but simple tractor. We offer the same through our licensee, a company called Tafi. And Massey Ferguson in India is #2, really with a very, very small gap to Mahindra. So we have everything, or AGCO has everything Mahindra has, maybe even better. But we are not as active in the United States as an Indian-made, with an Indian-made product, because we have our own product lines here and localized products here. There's few Japanese manufacturers like Kubota, you might have heard, but they're all in the compact tractor business, and they're not really, how they are called in our industry, they're not really full liners. So when it comes to global full liners, there are only 3, and AGCO is always within the #2 or 3 position.
In that regard, I think the India discussion is really interesting. I know you have, AGCO has a huge shareholder from Chennai, India, and it's Tafi, right? The owner of Tafi. But I also wanted to ask you about your China investments, because that came under your tenure. There was a plant built in Changzhou, China. I think there was one in the northeastern part as well. And I remember that the Changzhou plant was supplying like the smaller tractors. But can you tell us a bit about that investment, whether that was mainly for the Chinese market, or was that partially for China and partially for export? And how you see that panning out now in this kind of protectionist landscape that we're facing with US-China?
Yes, so that means sanctions and protectionism is something you never really know very well what's coming. So therefore, this needs to be handled in a way with a good strategy. So the Chinese investment has always been mainly for China, and then exports from that factory to Europe, to the United States, or to South America came on top of it. So the fact that we can't export anymore, or that I shouldn't say we, that they can't export anymore to the United States is not very good, but it's also not killing the investment.
And I think to remember there also being a knockdown version that's being brought in to avoid the tariffs, but I don't know if that's still going on, where some of the light assemblies now being done in Georgia. And I know that was one of your initiatives that you wanted to achieve, is to have some tractors being made here in Georgia at some point. But
yes, my dream still is that one day we have a full brush, very nice tractor assembly factory in Georgia.
Cool. Junaid, did you have another one from the gallery?
I'd like to, project another question. Actually, a couple of questions coming together from Murat and Lee. Martin, what would you say are the biggest challenges facing your industry in the short and long term? Along with a follow-up question from Lee, who asks about opportunities for international growth in the midst of all these disruptions that we're going through, be it the pandemic, the Ukraine-Russia situation, etc.?
Yes, I do believe that AGCO, as of today, is a very, very resilient company. So there are always risks. So we had the financial crisis, we had the COVID pandemic and all things. Now we have Russia and Ukraine. So, but in general, AGCO is very successful in handling these issues, always has been and still is today. And therefore, I don't see big risks right now or in the future, but I see more opportunities. The world population is still growing. We recently welcomed the 8 billionth human being on Earth. I think it was my grandson, Sam Richenhagen, who was born in Georgia, in Atlanta, on November 20th. So I think he must be the number 8 million, but I think officially it's somebody else. So the population is growing. We have climate changes, which make farming more sophisticated, which needs more intelligence.